And I have a sense right now that we need to make this next film quickly. And it's really about Israel. Hello, everyone. Tim Mahoney here with Steve Law from Patterns of Evidence. We are working on the next films in the series of films that we've made. The Patterns of Evidence series, as you know, has been going on for over 20 years. And today we're going to be talking a little bit, Steve, about our next film, which is going to be, well, we should say films, not film, right?
Right. I mean, we don't know how many, but we have an idea of the topics that we're going to cover. And so we're just moving ahead and seeing how it goes.
What I find I'm grateful for is the fact that during the early years, I had done so much filming, made so many trips into the Middle East. I had been filming, in the early days, I didn't really know exactly what all of this was about. I think I have a better understanding of what it's about today, that we are showing patterns of evidence of God, working in history and acting in history. But there's more, and it's very, very relevant, I think, today with what's happening in Israel, wouldn't you say?
Right. I mean, the logical place to go next is we ended at Mount Sinai. So what happened at Mount Sinai was the making of the covenant between God and the people of Israel. And so there's all sorts of questions that come up related to that. But today, one of the major themes of that covenant was the land of Israel that was promised originally to Abraham and through Isaac and now to Jacob's descendants, the people of Israel. And so there's lots of questions about the land. Did God really make this covenant? Is there evidence for that? If so, is it still valid today? And so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we started this, working on the Exodus, you realize that in order to understand information, you have to understand context, right? And the Bible is telling us about the beginning of time from Genesis all the way through to the end of time as we know it in the book of Revelation. If you understand that at a particular time in history, God called Abraham. He called him to follow him and to follow the Lord, and that he would make of him a great nation. And then he told him to leave where he lived and then to go to this other place and to walk the land. So what's interesting is that God promised this land to Abraham and his descendants, right? But he didn't give it to him right away, but he told him to walk the breadth of this land.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
I mean, he never received it as far as owning the land. He was always dealing with problems with the people who were living there. But his descendants were the ones who would end up being the ones to receive the land after they came out of Egypt.
When we started the Exodus, I had to go back to Abraham to really understand why were they living in this land of Egypt, and there's these promises and prophecies that were given.
Genesis 15, and it lays out basically all the main elements that would happen in Egypt in the Exodus. So the fact that they would be in a foreign land and be enslaved, but they would be multiplied like the stars of heaven, and yet one day brought out with great wealth and returned to the land.
And so we've been investigating that, and we've shown that in the film The Exodus, and then we talked about writing and Moses' controversy. And then we investigated the question of the sea parting, because wherever that sea parted is on the other side of that body of water would be what?
The mountain, Mount Sinai, where they met God, yes.
And then we looked at the six, different candidates, even though there's a lot more candidates for mountains, we looked at those. So here we are now, and we're trying to prayerfully understand which way we should tell the next part of the story. And in the middle of all this, we actually had a tour plan. We were going to, go to Israel, and it's going to be called the Covenant and the Conquest Tour. And then we had this big, tragic event happen in Israel with this terrorist attack. And you start to realize that the tension is top of the mind of every news channel is what's happening in Israel.
Right.
And prophetically speaking, this isn't really a surprise to the Bible.
Right.
Because the Bible is warning of the fact that God had given this land to these people, but there's going to be these battles that are going to come where the nations are coming against them.
And I think in Ezekiel, it actually talks about God had placed them in the center of the nations. In other words, it's where Europe and Asia and Africa all come together, is in this little land of Israel. And it's sort of not just geographically, but politically, it's at the center of the world. And so much revolves around Jerusalem and Israel as the center of prophecies for the future.
So here's the challenge is that I've been faced with thinking and praying about this is how do we go about unfolding this next series of films. And we've got a lot of footage that we have taken, but we don't have all of it. And we have a lot of editing and graphics and animations, as you know, with these films. One of the reasons for this video is just to sort of be open about what's going to happen next, how do we move forward? And we ended up making the last films by donations. People donated it for us to help us basically make these films. And that's where we're at again. And we're looking at, I think we have to release a film soon. I think it's very important that we get that film out because of what's happening. People need to understand really what this is about.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that we have a vision of actually moving through the entire Bible. And hopefully someday we'll have covered, major issues, not obviously every issue, but major issues of biblical history all the way through. And so the next step on that journey is the covenant. And when you talk about the covenant, the issue of the land bubbles to the surface. So I think one danger is we don't want to make it all about the land. But that is a key element of it, but it's bigger than that. In Deuteronomy 28, Moses predicts that not if, but when you break the covenant, certain things are going to happen. You're going to be defeated and destroyed, scattered to the four corners of the earth, uniquely persecuted, but one day brought back. And just the uniqueness of that persecution, it's like, why? It doesn't make any sense why this one people group would be so much hatred and so much persecution brought against them, and in a sustained way, not just in a certain decade or a century, but over thousands of years. It's very, very difficult to explain. And yet they are preserved with now they have their ancient language revived, and they're in their own land. No nation has ever returned to a land like Israel has. So these are all things that were prophesied thousands of years before. And it's, I think, one of the clearest evidences that the words of the Bible do have a divine source.
If you look for a pattern, you could look at, one of the things is to look at the prophecies. And that prophecy of if they broke the covenant, which Moses said that not if, but when they break the covenant. Well, it's happened twice. And we look at what happened earlier on with Babylon, that they disobeyed God and they broke the covenant and they were defeated. Their nation was destroyed. They were, driven out of the country and in captivity and persecuted in many ways. And then in the future, they did return.
Right.
And I remember talking to Israel Finkelstein about this, and he said, "Yeah, well, that's because that was written after it all happened to give a history of the nation,
Make it look like a prophecy, even though it wasn't." Yeah.
But I said it's happened twice. When you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and where they were written, you realize that documentation was hundreds of years prior to the destruction by the Romans when they destroyed Jerusalem.
Right.
And now in 1948, as we've talked about, is when the Israelites have come back. It's really dealing with headlines. When we think about the nation of Israel and having an understanding, having a context about, well, where do these people come from? Why did God choose these people to be his people? And what does that mean to be chosen?
Right. And I think the average person might say, well, why do I care about the things in the Bible? But even today, they can say, wow, the reason you should care is these things impact your world today. And if someone might be sending their son or daughter off to a war because of what's happening in Israel, and it all goes back to what's written in the Bible, that's a way to get people's attention and to tell them, you need to pay attention to this.
The world is dividing itself up right now, taking sides to these different, issues between Iran and Israel and China and Russia. But there was a time earlier in my life when I remember there were a lot of biblical, teachers on prophecy that they would look at the different players and they would look at scripture and they would try to connect the dots. It's difficult to do that, but I would have to say that there are certain dots that have connected, and that is that God had chosen this nation Israel all the way back from the time when Abraham decided to listen to God and to leave his family and go to a place that he knew not, where he was going, and led him on this journey and said that I'm going to give this land to you that was, I'm going to promise this land to you and your descendants.
Yeah, I think of Pat Boone's song, "This Is My Land," right? And how that he made that personal, because that's for many Jewish people, they say our deed to the land is the Bible. And so that right there brings the Bible front and center in world politics. And then that brings up all sorts of questions we can investigate.
There are a lot of people that have decided that they don't necessarily want to take the time to be a follower of the Lord. That they basically decided that life has a lot more to offer them, and or he's not that important, so they don't really know what the Bible says. But very interesting, because as we've been looking at making these films, I really want to make a film on Noah's Ark, but not even just the Ark, but what happened before the Ark. And there's an interesting verse. It says, "So as it was in the times of Noah, will it be at the times when Christ will return." People were doing all the things that they wanted to do. They're giving in marriage, they're having a good time, they had plans, and then boom. And I think the reason why Israel is a very unique nation is because it's a thermometer or a barometer, whatever you want to call it. It kind of tells you what's on God's timeline. And we've created the wall of time, and we know that within that wall of time, there were different times when there were prophecies that were given.
And I think that'll be one of the unique things about the upcoming series of films that we want to make on the covenant, is that it's not only going to be archaeology, it's going to be prophecy, it's going to be history, and it's going to be some science woven in there, because as you talked, there seems to be these laws woven into morality and into nature, into science that support what was written by Moses in the Bible. So those are very intriguing ideas that we can explore, and they all have to do with, are these writings of Moses, are they valid? Was there really a covenant that God made with the people of Israel? And is there any evidence that we can look at that would support that? And we're really excited, I think, to show that, yes, there is evidence, and in ways that might surprise people.
For some of you might not know this, but for many years I've been filming. I've made many, many trips to Israel. I've been to Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and have been gathering footage myself as well as a number of other people. So we've got quite a bit of information already recorded and interviews recorded. But to make these films, we really need to write them. We need to understand what's the best methodology to basically unfold this story. As you've seen in these other films, we take an approach we try to be creative, we try to be balanced, we hear from different points of view. I think, as I'm looking at it, multiple films, probably not too over, like we made some films that are like 2 hours and 20 minutes or whatever, a little bit shorter, but more of them, so we can focus and get them out quicker. But we still need help. We still need help making these films, to pay the rent, to basically pay salaries, to pay for animations that need to be created, music, all the things that you need to do to make a film. And Steve, film is really the currency of the culture. When you think about how popular, things like Netflix and Paramount Plus and Amazon, all of them, it's all centered around people watching content.
Right, and there's a lot of people who don't read books much anymore. So this is certainly a way to get the attention of people, and it not only connects with people who might not be believers or are on the fence. These films, I think, encourage the faith of those who already believe. There's so many messages out there telling you that what you're believing there's no substance to it. You're believing a fairy tale. And you hear that often enough and you get discouraged,
Yeah.
But when you find the real evidence that supports it, it's like, the Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. When you see it, your heart sings, because this is true. God is providing evidence that shows, yes, this is true, and you don't have to divorce your mind and reason from your faith. That the two can go together.
Steve, it's been a long journey, making these films, and I think about the Moses Controversy was a film that just came, it had a sense that film needed to be told before we went on, and I have a sense right now that we need to make this next film quickly. and it's really about Israel. In some ways, it's about the prophecies of Israel. And these are ways that God is testifying to the truth of his word. And we think about the word New Testament or Old Testament. A testament is really a testimony. God has inspired, men, and all of them are coming from the nation of Israel. All the books of the Bible were inspired to Jewish writers, and they are writing down the testimony of God. And the first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses. And we think about that. But there are warnings, and there are clues, and there are things that should prepare our hearts and our minds. And so I believe, as I was thinking and praying about, well, what are we doing when we're making these films? And there were 2 words that came after weeks of thinking and praying. And one word was remembrance. And Steve, I don't know how many times, but it says, do not forget what God did by bringing you up out of Egypt.
Repeated over and over in the Psalms and the prophets, and the prophets were calling people to come back because the people were disobeying.
Yep.
And they were warning them, hey, God's going to keep his word. He said you would be defeated and scattered if you went down this path. And they were pleading with the people to come back to the covenant, but they would not.
Where we're at a place today now is that sadly, there's still, this is the Jewish story, but there's many Jewish people who basically don't think that any of this is true. There's this verse in the Bible that says these are the apple of God's eye. He chose them to be his nation, to be his people. And they were called to be his people so that they could actually be like the priest. They were the ones to communicate who God was to the whole world. In fact, I shared this with Rabbi Hartman. I shared this with him. I said, God chose to reveal himself to Israel at Mount Sinai so that they would reveal who he was to the world. And that's exactly what's happened. None of us would know about God or how creation happened if it wasn't for the scriptures that were written down by Jewish people. The Lord revealed who he was in his plan over the centuries. And the other word that I had received was forewarning. Remembrance and forewarning. And I think that we're living at a time right now where people are playing with fire. The Bible talks about that at the end of the age, that what we think is going to be going on and on and on, God's got his own timetable.
As in the days of Noah, right?
Yeah. There, all of a sudden the world changed completely, and he destroyed all the world by water. And he says the next time he'll do it by fire. Now, we don't talk about these things, but are they true? Is that true? Is these things going to happen? A lot of people are worried about the world ending because of climate change or whatever. But there's more to it than that. There's more concerns that we have. And I think if we have family or loved ones that don't believe any of this, we have to basically, help them to be warned and to understand that God has been acting through history. In fact, we can see things, we might even say he's acting right now, and what is going to happen next.
Testament being a testimony, but testament is also a covenant, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And the next step on our journey is to explore this Old Covenant, so to speak, that was made at Mount Sinai. And the first film, I believe, will cover the 40 years from the making of the covenant on Sinai to the renewal of the covenant in the Promised Land. And there is a connection between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant as well. So the Bible is an amazingly intricate, interwoven thing that we're going to continue to explore. And I just know we're going to come up with things that are going to inspire people and that they're going to come away with their faith encouraged.
Yeah, there is amazing evidence. There are amazing patterns of evidence. And we think about the cursed tablet found at Mount Ebal. And,
Exactly.
I went to that location and we've already filmed a lot of that. So once again, we would appreciate, well, first of all, we appreciate all your help. And we're asking if you would prayerfully consider helping us, being a monthly supporter of Patterns of Evidence. You can give to Patterns of Evidence Foundation. And our goal is to continue on sharing all of these biblical evidences with you as much as we can. And we've got exciting things in the future. And we appreciate your prayers and your support. So once again, thank you for all of you who've been helping us, and for those of you who might consider, we would appreciate it. The type of films that we're making are very unique, and they are reaching many people, both because of their approach and because of their, I think, multi points of view, it makes people be able to take it more seriously. And so, for all those reasons, consider supporting patterns of evidence. Once again, thank you, and God bless.